Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is going to be English 101, Josh Motes' course, and this is going to be the lecture notes for March 24th. So if you didn't watch the video yesterday, please be sure to watch it. I've got a link here at the top of the Google Doc. It's going to explain all of the new changes going on as far as the class in terms of COVID-19 and being online. Some of the major things are that you need to make sure that you watch every single lecture video and then do the daily writing, because that's how I'm taking attendance. So now it's not only going to count for your daily writing, but it's also going to count as your attendance. So you need to make sure that you're doing that. I know attendance has been rough this semester, so you want to make sure that you're getting that attendance. And all of the videos in the future should release around noon, and I'm going to be live streaming them at noon, and then they'll be recorded for later. If you can't catch the noon stream, you can come by and watch it later and just do the daily writing within the next 48 hours or so, and I'll give you credit for it. Today we didn't have the streaming just because I didn't realize that YouTube has a limit on streaming to where you can't stream for or within 24 hours of whenever you create a new account. And the account is over here. It's just called Josh Motes. I put a link yesterday in the email, and then I'll put another one here today. So it's very bare bones. That's by design. I don't want too many, random people showing up watching the videos. I mean, it's fine if they want to, but I just don't want too much of a distraction on the live stream in the chat or to attract like the bots or whatever. By the way, do not click on any links that anyone puts in the chat. Y'all know that. It's common sense. But be sure to watch that video. Make sure that you understand everything. I'll have a link to this video in the daily notes in the top, and I'll also send it out in an email, and then I'll also create a new folder in the daily writing folder that's going to say lecture video links, and you can just go through and find that. So I'm just going to put it everywhere. If you have any questions, please email me, and that's going to be just at my standard jmotes@vols.utk.edu. Do not ever correspond with any other email, okay, just in case someone tries to fish you and get your personal information. Okay. So let's go ahead and get in here. Just once again, let me know that's the best place to ask questions. You can put comments on the video if you want, but the best place is just to ask me in the email, and I'll be happy to sort everything out for you. Okay, so first up, I'm going to go ahead and extend the deadline for the essay that's supposed to be due this week, Project 4, to next Thursday. So I'm giving you a full week on this one. And the reason why I decided to do that is probably pretty obvious. It's really crazy out there. I know that some of y'all might be sick yourself. I know that some of your family members or friends might be sick. You might be having to take care of siblings because your parents are working from home. There's just all sorts of, stuff going on out there right now. So I just went ahead and extended it for another week because I don't think it's really going to hurt anybody. And I went ahead and got rid of all the rest of the written homework as well. So everything is just going to be the big essays and then the daily writing that I give you here on this in these lectures. Okay, so there's no homework, there's no reading outside of the big projects and outside of the daily writing that I'm going to give you. I'm trying to help you out as much as I can because I know that this is going to be a tough transition for a lot of people. Okay, so keep all of that in mind. If you have any questions, let me know. I should have the Project 3s graded within the next couple of days. I'll send that out for you just like I have been in an email where I calculate everything up. I tell you your attendance. I tell you your daily writings. And if you have any questions about that grade, you can email me. We can talk about it that way. I will have Discord set up like I talked about in the last video as well, but I'm still working on a couple of security measures there, researching and learning a little bit about that. So that should be up and running by Thursday. But yeah, just watch that video. It gives you a much bigger overview. And in general, because this is YouTube as well, you can actually fast forward this if you want to. If you can understand it fast enough or you just want to get through it faster, you can click on the settings here and then just go to the playback speed, and you can do it at 1.25 speed and probably get most of it, or maybe even 1.5 speed, or if you're really focusing in, maybe 2 speed. I don't know. You can probably speed it up a little bit if you want to get through it faster. So that's kind of the magic of YouTube versus real life. I'm sure some of y'all wish you could, fast forward me at times when I'm up there lecturing, but you can do it on YouTube now. So I guess that's one of the cool perks. Okay. I could... I thought about putting timestamps in there, but I really want y'all to watch all of it. I don't want to encourage you to jump around too much. So watch it at a faster speed if you want, but I'm not going to put the timestamps in because you really do need to at least pay attention somewhat to all of the sections that we're going through here. Okay, so that's when that's due. I gave everyone an extension there. check out the syllabus with what's going on with the final unit. I guess I can pull that up here really quickly. So this is the revised syllabus here, and once again, I have a whole video about that posted, so I'm not going to go into all the details about what's changed there, but I do just want to hit on the very last couple of things here. In that the final draft, the P5 final draft, is already due Friday the 4th, and my grades are going to be due the Tuesday after that. So that is the very last date. I cannot extend that anymore. You got to make sure you get P5 in there. We're going to start talking about P5 on Thursday. That's kind of the schedule. I had to restructure the back half of the class because it was going to be a group presentation. Obviously, that's not going to work out too well in the current environment. So we've got a cool new unit that I've designed that's going to be set up for you, that's going to help you make a lot of the skills you've been learning in class really practical, help you get the jobs that you want, help you get the scholarship, get that money that you want. So stay tuned for that. We'll start talking about that a little bit more on Thursday. Now, do make sure that you turned in the homework for tonight. I went ahead and left that one on there just because I know that some people did it over spring break. And so I want to make sure you get credit for that. So if you haven't done this yet, this is the very last sort of reading and homework. So make sure that you do that sometime over the next few days. I'll give you credit for it. Then after that, as you can see, there's no additional reading, no additional writing. It's just working on the big projects and doing the in-class stuff. Okay. And make sure that you submit some notes from our conferences before spring break as well. Most people have been pretty good about this, but there's still a couple of people that I know that went to it that didn't actually take any notes. So just think back to what we talked about and just jot down a couple of things, just a half a page, just, a paragraph or two about what we talked about, some stuff that you learned, some stuff that you think we could work on, or that you could work on rather with your essay, and that'll be fine. Okay, if you want me to review a draft of your P4 or you have any questions, once again, just email me and I'm happy to help you out with that. Okay, so here are some of the major tips that I have for people to improve their essays based on what I kind of talked about in the conferences and just discussing some ideas with people via email, reading over a couple of drafts. These are some things that I think will help out. And make sure also that you have your annotated and your rough drafts submitted, okay? So many of y'all, did not have that in your box, but I know some of y'all were still wanting to work on your rough drafts, didn't have it by the time of the conference. I'm going to be a little lenient about that because of everything that's going on out there, but you got to make sure you get those in for credit, okay? So make sure you get that rough draft in within the next few days. We do have that extension. You have until 9 days from now for when that's due, but just make sure that you get that in there and make sure you get the annotated in there as well. And like I mentioned in the course changes video that I got linked at the top of these notes, I am going to be a little bit more lenient on the book sources just because the library is closed now. I know that some of y'all already had some books, and that's awesome, and I think that will make your research stronger. So definitely keep the books, use the books. But if you didn't find 3 books before the shutdown, then I'll let that slide. You just need 1 print source out of the 5. The rest of them still need to be scholarly. It can't be like procon.org or Wikipedia. You still need to use JSTOR or some other sort of venue to find high-quality sources. But I'm not going to require them all to be, or at least 3 of them to be book sources, just because I know some of y'all, just don't have 3 books, and you can't get to them because the library's closed. So that's just my way of reasoning it. 1 book shouldn't be hard to find, or 1 source that has, it can have existed in print, even if you don't have the physical book, remember, you could still find like an ebook or something like that. If you're still having trouble finding that for your essay, just email me, let me know. I'll see if I can find a source for you to help you out. Okay, so here are a couple of tips that I have for people. Okay, so number 1, and this doesn't apply to a lot of people, but it may apply to different people in different ways. But just be careful about your expectations for the essay, right? Based on if you're using information that you've used in another class, just try to focus on meeting the standards for this class, okay? So I'm worried that sometimes if people, use ideas from another class or use parts of an essay from another class. Remember, I'm okay with that if you do that. Make sure if it's with another professor, like if you're kind of trying to double dip a lot of your information from like a psychology class with this class, I'm okay with that. I don't care. But a lot of professors won't like that. They'll call that paper recycling as a form of academic dishonesty. I think that my standards are probably a little bit different from what would happen in a psych class or a business class. So to me, you're making adjustments of similar ideas. So I'm pretty chill with that, but a lot of professors are not. So make sure you clear it with them first if you're going to do that. Or if you're translating like a high school essay, trying to turn it into a college essay, that's fine. Just be aware that the standards are going to be higher. Okay, they should be. It's college. We're learning stuff in this class, ideally, right? So the standards should be raised up a little bit. So just don't think that because you wrote about some research topic in high school sophomore year and you just plug it in and add in a couple of sources that it's necessarily going to be an A-level essay, even if you got an A back in high school, because, you know, the knowledge about discourse communities and professional research and things like that are going to be a little bit higher probably in this class than you had in most high school settings. So just keep that in mind. If you're really interested in doing it, if it's just, you know, a topic that you've really loved, you've written about it a lot in the past, you're very passionate about it, that's perfectly fine. I highly encourage that. That's awesome. But just don't think that it's going to be like a huge shortcut to do that, right? Do it because you're really interested in doing it, not because you're looking to find a shortcut. Okay, and otherwise, that's fine. Okay, the next thing that I'll mention here is focus carefully on proper source introductions and integration. So we've been working with sourcing for several essays now, but it's going to be, the standards are going to be a lot higher in this class because we've talked about sourcing a lot more. Almost every class we've talked about sourcing. So just make sure that you are doing proper source introductions. Remember, that's first name, last name of the author, title of the work, and it's a really quick sort of one sentence. What is this source about? How is it going to contribute to your research? Okay. So I know that it's kind of popular for a lot of students to write your argument first and then sprinkle in a couple of quotes or sprinkle in a couple of paraphrases that agree with you. That's sort of the high school style research, at least from what I remember in high school and what I see a lot of times in students, freshman students. You know, you can do that. I can't stop you from, you know, whatever writing process you're most comfortable with. But I would say that it is very important to have your research integrated organically into your argument and not just feel like a decoration, right? You need to be, you know, disagreeing with your sources sometimes, taking it in a different direction, getting into a conversation with the sources. It can't just be sprinkle them in and they feel very separate from you. It needs to be a part of you, right? It needs to be a part of your argument. Okay. So yeah, a big part of this unit that we've been learning is how to integrate your own ideas into that scholarly conversation to help you get a higher ethos, a higher level of professionalism, and to help familiarize you with the way that professionals write as you move up in the field. Okay, so I went ahead and constructed a little cheat sheet here for you, a little sourcing overview. So here are just kind of the biggest things that people have asked me about sourcing in these classes. And then over the years, these are very common questions that students have as well. Remember that you have your Harbrace Handbook, which is digital. You can get to that on Canvas. It'll tell you anything you need to know about MLA citations. I've been assigning readings that tell you about how to cite different situations. We've been talking about it in class. So you should be all over this. You can also look at the Purdue OWL as an additional resource if you want to click on it. I got the link right there for you, and you can just kind of scroll down. It'll tell you what to do in different situations. Single author, you know, title of the source, other contributors, version, number, publisher, publication date. It's got it all lined up for you there. Then you can do MLA in-text citations, the basics. Click on that, and it'll tell you how to navigate pretty much any situation you can come across. So just use the tabs over here on the left. It can help you out. And this can also help you out with other citation styles. So if you have a science class or another class that uses APA, they also have an APA citation style guidelines as well. And they have Chicago style if, God forbid, one of your professors is making you use Chicago style. You can use that as well. So it's a really useful free resource out there. So it's not a full substitute for the Harbrace Handbook. I think that gives you a lot more depth, but this does give you some really solid basics there. So here are just a couple of things, and we've talked about most of these in class, but I'm just going to hit on them one more time here. You only need to cite your source in parentheses, but you should recognize any other sources that might be referenced in the sentence itself. So an indirect citation is when your source cites another. So an example of this is Arthur Smith claims in his book, Most Days In, that John Harrington in A Lost Culture once theorized that Newton drew his ideas about the cosmos from an interesting reading of Leviticus, Smith 17, okay? So in this example, you have Smith who's talking about Harrington, right? But you only have to cite Smith. But you want to give credit to Harrington, okay? So you want people to know, hey, he's talking about this guy, John Harrington, and this is the work that he's talking about. That way the reader can go look that up and find that information if they want to, right? But I'm not forcing you to go find that information. In a 400 level class, they're going to make you go find Harrington, right? But in a 100 level class, I think that's a bit extreme. I think this is fine. So if one author cites another author, just make sure that you're name dropping everybody, giving them credit in your paraphrase or in your quote, and then just cite the source where you found it. So just cite Smith here, okay? Anonymous statistics. So if it is something that's anonymous, so this is common in a lot of like governmental agencies. So you have like the NIH, National Institute of Health, CDC, different sort of organizations, or other like charities or nonprofits and things like that. Sometimes they won't tell you who the author is, or they'll just give you some kind of relatively anonymous statistics. You would cite by the first important word in the title. So for example, if you say, the NIH in the article Why Smoking Kills claims that 47% of people who smoke develop lung cancer by the age of 57, smoking too. The NIH acquired the statistic by evaluating the mortality rates. So if you can explain their methodology, if they tell you how they got that information, include that in your citation. But at least make sure that you have the title and the page number of the work, okay? Remember, if it's one of those scrolling web page type of things, just copy paste the body paragraph, like the body information on the page into a Google Doc and just call it the page number there, okay? So if you ever encounter a scrolling website, make sure that you're doing that. Okay, abridging a title. So if the title is very lengthy, you can abridge the title for all references beyond the first, and this happens a lot with academic titles. So the first time that you mention something, you need to do the first name and last name of the author, full name. If it's multiple authors, just say that it's the main person plus a bunch of other authors, and then do the entire title of the work. After that, you can abridge it and just use the first couple of important words in the title. So for example, this might be the original title of an article. The reason why multimedia is ruining our country, insights into race discrimination and the Native American experience in Arizona. Okay, that's a very common formula. Like usually they'll have some sort of like catchy title, and then they'll have colon, and they'll tell you what it's really about in detail. That's sort of the standard for a lot of academic work. All right, so make sure you give all of this, and then after that you can abridge it, and then you can say the reason why as an abridgment. So if you say this, if you just say, John Smith in his work, such and such argues this and this and this, and then a few sentences later you say, John Smith in the reason why contradicts this claim by this other source for these reasons. Okay, so any other time that you need to mention the title, you can just abridge it if you want to for the first couple of important words in the title. And make sure you still put it in quotes or italics, depending on the situation. Okay. If you have multiple works by the same author, use the first important word in the title to designate that in your citations. So you should list it in alphabetical order on the MLA citation page, but then when you actually cite it in the essay, use this. So for example, if the name is James Smith, you would not want to put Smith 17 or Smith 20 here because people aren't going to know. Is it Reasons Why We Hunt, or is it Tigers in the Night? If you just put the last name of the author, they're not going to know. So if it's the same author and multiple works, use the first important word in the title. So Reasons, in this case, if you're referencing this one, and then it would be Tigers in this case if you're referencing this one. And then in the MLA citation, like I just said, you will put the first one that's alphabetical here. So R comes before T. Do the full normal MLA citation. Then after that, just do 3 dashes, a period, and then do the next ones. Okay, if there was a third source by the same author, you would do 3 dashes again, and then the title of the work. Okay, so this just makes it really easy for someone just to kind of scroll through your citation page and see that you have a lot of works by the same author there, and it also makes it very clear which source you're talking about in your actual citations. Okay, If something has no page numbers, like I just mentioned before, if it's one of those scrolling articles, just copy paste it into a Google Doc and just tell me the page number that shows up there. Okay, common knowledge. So I've mentioned this in several different classes. A lot of this is going to come down to specifics, and there's not a hard and fast rule here. It's interpretive. But a good rule of thumb is if you don't think the author is going to give you credit, or the reader rather, is going to give you credit for knowing that information, you need to be able to cite, okay? So it's all about the perception of the reader. You don't want them thinking that you're plagiarizing something, okay? So even if you heard something that was really awesome, so the example that I have here, imagine that you took a philosophy seminar, you learned a lot about Kant's categorical imperative, right? Philosophy seminar, Kant, you wanted to talk about, you know, his metaphysics, categorical imperative. You can't discuss explicit particulars about that theory without a source, even though you might know it from a lecture or your own personal research and insights and just reading the works. You have to have something to cite, okay? So often the degree of particularity determines the eligibility for something to be common knowledge. If it's super broad, if you're just saying a lot of people died in World War II, even if you're saying like millions of people died in World War II, that's fine. But if you're saying something like a certain office, the CDC estimates that, they wouldn't be the people who have the records for that, but whatever. The CDC estimates that 12.3 million people died in Europe during World War II or whatever. You need something specific because that's a very specific number. I've got an example here as well. So this would be common knowledge. You would not need a source for something like this. Darwin and his theory of evolution revolutionized the way that Victorians thought about the relationship between science and morality. Okay, that's broad enough. You're mentioning Darwin. Most people know who Darwin is. You're not mentioning specific works by Darwin. You're not mentioning specific, like, in-depth mechanics of evolution. You're just saying that he revolutionized stuff in regard to science and morality. Okay, you don't need that. It's pretty standard. But if you say this, Darwin's publication of The Origin of Species in 1859 intersected in many ways with Feuerbach's Essence of Christianity from 1841 in respect to the capacity for humans to interpret morality without reference to metaphysics, you're going to have a source in there somewhere, right? Because you're mentioning a very specific work, you're mentioning a specific date, and you're doing that twice, right? So no one is going to give you credit for knowing that as sort of a novice in the field, right? They're going to say, okay, you got that information from somewhere. You need to have some citations, okay? So yes, it is kind of a gray area. If you're not sure, just cite everything, find a source and cite it. And like I said, I know it's not fair if you have studied a lot on your own or you have had like a really in-depth lecture about it from a philosophy class or a psychology class or whatever. But you need to learn that that's something that you have to do or you're going to get busted up for plagiarism by other professors and potentially other professionals in the field. Okay, so I'm trying to help you out here. If you're having trouble finding a source, just let me know. We can get that sorted out. Okay, 3 types of citations, just really quickly. Remember that you can paraphrase, and we talked about this very early in the semester, and in every unit we've talked about it, but I'll mention it one more time. Paraphrasing is just where you're summarizing what was said, okay? So you still need a citation, last name of the author, title of the work, and then you need the parenthetical citation there. So make sure that you're still mentioning the author, you're mentioning the work, and then you have a parenthetical citation. Even though it's not a direct quote, you still need to do that. Okay, a quotation y'all are probably very familiar with. It is quotes, and this is literally word for word what was said in that source, okay? And then you should have a parenthetical citation after that. I didn't put one there, but you need a parenthetical citation after that. And ideally, you introduce the quote. Don't just start a sentence off with a random quote and then cite it. Tell the reader what it is, okay? So like here, for example, Michael Smith makes the following claim in his article, "May we rest in peace." That way, people know, okay, this is a quote from Michael Smith. This is, the article that I'm referencing, "May we rest in peace." So it's very simple. It's one sentence, but it just lets the reader know what you're talking about. If you just have a quote in there and then you just at the end throw in a parentheses, with the page number, yes, they'll know it's Smith, but they won't know the title of the work. And as they're reading the quote, they won't know what you're talking about. It's going to be confusing. So you always want to let your reader know what's going on so that they can read it quickly and efficiently. Remember, we talked about that last class. That's really the key. You want people to be able to blast right through your essay, get all of the information they need as quickly as possible, not have to backtrack, not have to try to figure out what you're talking about, but just you want to allow them to be able to speed read it as fast as possible. Okay. Now remember that you only want to use a quote if the particular phrasing matters. So if it's something particularly interesting and poetic, or the tone is matter, if they're really sassy in it, or if they're saying something that's really funny, that's when you would use a quote. Or if you are analyzing specific phrasing, like if they use a specific term like term annuity and steal. So those of us who die soon after investing in a term annuity effectively steal from our loved ones. Okay, so this is bold for several reasons why you would include this as a quote instead of a paraphrase. Number one is term annuity. So you might want to explain exactly what that is, because your reader may not know what that is. So that's a definition that you'll want to go to in depth. So that's why you would quote it. And then this term steal is very aggressive, right? That's, you're saying that financial companies are effectively stealing from you. It's controversial, it's aggressive, so you want to explain why this person uses that word choice and why it's either appropriate or inappropriate, okay? So this is an example of a term you need to define and look at in depth, and also some aspect of tone that's kind of sassy or ominous here that you want to examine a little more closely. So that makes it a good candidate for a quote versus a paraphrase. Okay, and then a block quote. You want to make sure that it's 4 lines or longer. You don't want to do this very often, but if you're going to be quoting a whole bunch of things in a row from a page, you might as well go ahead and get it all out there and then just analyze it at once in some situations. So an example of this, and we talked about how to make substitutions a few classes ago in terms of brackets, ellipses, and I used that Unpacks example there. Okay. And then you can see I went ahead and linked an essay that I wrote in grad school a long time ago. If it's still linkable here, we'll say, yeah, here we go. Okay, so this uses several block quotes in there, and I use footnotes in here as well. You don't have to use footnotes. That's something more that you'll encounter a lot more in grad school. But you can kind of go through and see this essay and how I ended up using block quotes in it relatively effectively, I think. I mean, there's always stuff. I could definitely polish this up. Going back and, rereading this, I'm like, oh, man, I need to need to spruce some of this up. But you can go through and sort of see what that's all about. So, yes, there is some talk about, it was for a class, it was on, 19th century Victorians and sexuality. So I was looking at, the title is Hindu Virtue and Victorian Eroticism, Representations of the Kama Sutra in Henry Ashby's bibliography. So, if that's something, if you're kind of squeamish or whatever about that kind of stuff, then it may not be for you. But I'm not asking you to read it. You don't need to read it. I'm never going to ask you any questions about it. I'm just showing it to you just so you can see how I use block quotes in there. Okay, and some of the example essays that I also posted up under the sample essays, you can also see how other students use block quotes as well. Okay. So make sure that your sourcing is strong. That is a major part of this unit. So you want to make sure that you're on top of it, because you really can't get an A on this unit if you don't have strong sourcing, right? If you're not at a bare minimum introducing your sources, contextualizing them, and using, making intelligent use of paraphrasing and quoting, and integrating those sources with your own ideas. If you're not at least trying to do those types of things, then it's pretty much going to be impossible to get an A, because we've been talking about it all class, and that's like the major point of this unit is sourcing. Okay. One of the final things that I'll mention here, and then we'll move on and do some more stuff today, is you want to emphasize your unique contribution to the subject to help you unify your research, okay? So you should have a very clear argument, and you should aim to persuade your reader to do or think something very specific, okay? So you should not just have a collection of research that doesn't have a purpose, right? It's not a book report. It's not to show me that you read a lot of stuff and you understand it. It's that you're making a contribution, right? You're doing something innovative. You're doing something interesting and new with the subject material. Now, remember that the threshold for this is very low. I understand it's a freshman level class. You don't have to have a Nobel Prize winning, originality, but I want you to make a gesture towards a level of originality and creativity, okay? So more than a book report. It's okay if you're not the first person in the world who's ever said something like this, okay? but you just need to make sure you're saying something bold, you're saying something interesting, something a little controversial. That doesn't mean it has to be politically controversial. It just means that somewhat reasonable people could disagree with it, okay? If you're writing something as your main argument and you're just like, I think every person's going to agree with this right off the bat, like no one's going to disagree, it's probably not bold enough, right? It's probably not innovative enough. So try to get to something that's innovative. The example that we used in class was Hitler, right? You wouldn't want to make an argument that says Hitler is evil, okay? Because everyone's going to be on board with that for the most part, except for neo-Nazis. All right, so most people are going to be on board with that. But if you were to say something more nuanced, like a big part of why Hitler committed a lot of the atrocities he committed was because he was drugged up on all of these weird cocktails that were basically tantamount to cocaine and meth, then that would be something that would be interesting, right? If you were trying to investigate his personal doctor and these concoctions he was creating for Hitler and talking about the biology of it and how that influenced some of his key decisions in the war, that would be interesting. And I've had people write about that. Actually, several students have written about that over the years, interestingly enough. So that's something where you're taking something that could be generic, Hitler is evil, and you're exploring in depth some aspect of it to to bring to light some new and interesting information. So it's not that no one had ever written about that. They had sources that were talking about that. It was just that was a little bit off the beaten trail, right? It was a little different. It was a little bold and interesting. Okay, so make sure you're doing that with your argument. Okay. So as you're doing this, think about what would readers or what would experts already know? What are people going to know? And if they do already know it, you probably don't have to spend a ton of time explaining it. You can set up and just let them know that you know it. Give some appropriate background information and research, but try to transition into something that's original and interesting as quickly as you can within reason in your essay, right? What would they expect you to discuss? We have gone over this over and over and over again in class, but you want to make sure that you are touching on everything that an expert is going to expect you to touch on, right? So if you are the same example I keep coming back to over and over again, if you're writing about gun control, they're going to expect you to say something about school shootings. They're going to expect you to say something about the Second Amendment, right? So if you are talking about gun control in a professional setting and you're just talking about going out and, hunting with your buddy or whatever, and like this really cool bonding experience that you had and you were able to hunt down this deer or whatever, that's not going to fly in a lot of academic settings because it's not engaging with the types of arguments people would expect you to engage with, right? If it doesn't say anything about Second Amendment, school shootings, different kinds of laws that have been passed in the last, 20, 30 years, they're going to say, man, that's a cool story, but it's not scholarly, right? They're going to say that's just an anecdotal, that's kind of a more casual story. Now, it's not saying you can't include personal stories like that, right? If you have a bunch of information about the Second Amendment, or you're making an argument that hunting is necessary to control certain populations that might otherwise overcrowd an ecosystem like deer or something else, if you're making that kind of argument and you want to throw in a personal hunting story and you think it makes sense with the argument that you're making, you can do that. But it still needs to engage with those other conversations, or you need to explicitly mention why you're not engaging. So you could say early on in the essay, I'm choosing not to talk about the Second Amendment in this conversation about gun violence because I want to focus more on the psychology of perpetrators, and I want to look at cyberbullying. I want to look at social media and things like that. So, just come out and say it. Just say, I'm not going to talk about the Second Amendment. I'm not going to talk about the Brady Bill or, these other types of legal things because I want to focus on the psychology, okay? So it's okay if you don't talk about everything that's really important or that people are interested in about your topic, but you should at least acknowledge it. Say, I'm aware that people talk about this aspect of my topic. However, I'm not going to go there in this essay for these reasons. So just let them know. Just tell them straight up why you're not doing it. Okay, and if you have a good reason, that's legit, but you don't want them to think that you're ignorant, like you're just not thinking about it, or you haven't done your research and you don't understand, that topic or that aspect of the topic is important. Okay, so how does your argument contribute to ongoing discussions about your topic in respect to perceptions about culture and history? Remember that the history is really relatively light. Remember that it's going to be relatively light. I wanted people to start a little bit in the past, like in the 90s, and then work your way forward in terms of history, just thinking about how your topic has evolved over time. But you can make it mostly contemporary. So you can just have like maybe half a page early on just talking about the history of a certain aspect of your topic if you want, and then move to contemporary. Or you can keep it all historical. You know, there are some people that are keeping everything in the past, and that's fine too. I just wanted you to be aware of how a conversation has evolved over time, right? And not just jump in and think about, okay, what are people saying right now in 2020 about your topic? You can have that, but I also want you to think about, okay, well, what did people say in 2016 about your topic? What did people say in 2005 about your topic? What did people say in 97 about your topic, right? So just think about it, you know, over the last 25 years or so, and work your way into the present if you want to. I just didn't want people to miss out on that historical context and how an aspect of your topic has evolved over time. Okay, so I know some people asked me about that. It was a little confusing. Do you have to make it fully historical? And the answer to that is no, although you can. I just wanted people to have a sense of change over time and evolution of a conversation, because I think that's really important. Okay, so just think about, how does your argument contribute? You know, why does what you're saying matter? How does that fit into conversations about the Second Amendment? How does that fit into conversation about funding for public education? How does that fit in with conversations about, you know, the role of social media and the psychology of teens? Okay, so just being explicit about how your ideas should change the way that people think about whatever the topic is. Whether you're agreeing with certain sources, disagreeing with other sources, taking it a step further, going in a direction that maybe other sources aren't thinking about, combining different fields in ways that people haven't thought about before. So just explain, you know, just kind of walk people through it as you're going through your argument, as you have your research. Just talk about, why is this important, right? What do you want people to learn from this as they're reading your essay? Okay? And just make sure that you have a solution the whole time. What do you want people to do or think as they read your essay? What is your mission? What do you want people to get out of your essay? Why is it important? Okay? And the final thing that we'll mention here, and then we'll move on, be much more specific about all of your claims in your essay, okay? So remember the mantra that I've been saying all semester, just one more sentence, okay? So anytime you make a claim, anytime you're saying this research means this, or this is how we should interpret this aspect of history, or this is why my argument is important for these reasons, just spend one more sentence. Just say, hey, could I slow down and explain what I mean by this term a little bit more? Can I slow down and explain the historical context just a little bit more? Can I slow down and analyze in just a little bit more depth what this person is talking about in this source and why it's important? Can I talk about how it connects with other sources in some ways? Okay. So just remember that. And remember that you're trying to remove as much ambiguity as possible. You want people to know exactly what you're saying and why it's important throughout the entire essay. So as I've said, you know, previously about earlier units, you don't want to write this like a murder mystery. Murder mysteries are great. They're a lot of fun. But people, this is not that, right? And by that, I mean that people should know what you're saying at the beginning. There shouldn't be like an, oh, gotcha, you know, on page 5. Oh, my essay's really about this, right? You don't want to pull a switcheroo on them. So you want them to know very early on, what is your argument? Why is it important? And then they should be able to see why it's evolving. Okay, so anything that could be ambiguous, where they're not sure what you're talking about, it could mean one or two different things, make sure you clarify that. So especially if you're talking about really like broad, like philosophical ideas, like this is what justice means, or this is what poverty means, or this is what love means, or something like that, make sure that you're explaining exactly what you mean and just slowing down a little bit there. Okay. And just sort of anticipate, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second, but just anticipate, how could people disagree with you? As you're writing it, just think, is there a way that someone could interpret this differently that I may not intend, right? Could they interpret my argument as, you know, trying to promote a certain type of ideas that maybe I'm not intending to promote, right? And just make sure that you're kind of shutting that down and addressing that as much as possible. Okay. Larger structures. We talked about this near the end of class, and we're not going to have a break scheduled in here. Obviously, if you need to take a break, you can just pause the video or whatever, watch it in little, 10, 15-minute chunks. If you need to, that's part of the magic of YouTube and these pre-recorded videos. So we're not going to have a built-in break, and we're not going to have built-in time for people to write in the pre-recorded videos. I think in the live streams, I will give you guys time to actually write. But for these pre-recorded videos, I'm just going to tell you to pause and write, and then we'll just move on to the next part. Okay. But just remember when you're writing your essays, these are the basic things that should be happening in your larger structures. You should introduce the topic of the paragraph. So just one sentence, what's this paragraph about? Introduce a key source. So which source are you doing? First name, last name, title. Be sure to discuss any context that might be relevant for understanding that aspect of your argument. Okay, so key definitions, key historical events that are going on, key cultural perceptions that are going on at the time, other competing arguments about your topic that are circulating in the culture at the time. Cite your source at least once, either paraphrase or a quote. If you want to, you can compare your source to other sources. Integrate your own ideas into the conversation in some ways, and then transition to your next point. And if you want to, you can connect with previous points as well. Okay, so go back, look at the notes from last time. We talked about structure a lot, and I gave you lots of different samples you could look at. And remember, there are like 8 sample essays, I believe. So be sure that you're flipping through, looking at those, and just kind of seeing how they're structuring their arguments. Okay. So what I want you to do now is just think about this, and this will be part of your daily writing. Just write this directly on your draft. Just pick a couple of these things that we just talked about, pause, and sort of try to implement that into your writing. So one of them could be work on your sourcing, introduce and integrate your research, use signal verbs to distinguish your voice. So just make sure you're introducing your sources. Do you have the first and last name of the source? Do you have the title? Are you just in 1 or 2 sentences explaining what is this source about? Why is it important? What was going on in the culture and context of the time when this was created? Okay, so just make sure you're explaining the source and introducing them properly. Work on your solution. So how are you contributing unique ideas to your research? What do you want to say about this topic? What do you think people need to know the most? What do they need to understand that a lot of people seem to not be understanding or not talking about and emphasizing enough? Okay, so what's your unique perspective that you're adding to this topic? And finally, be more specific. Find some places where you analyze research or offer solutions and try to add just 1 or 2 more sentences. Can I explain this key term a little bit more? Can I add in some more about context? Can I connect this source with another source? Can I explain why this is important? Maybe I just assumed people are going to think this is important, but maybe I could explain why it's important. Why should people care about this more than they currently do? Okay? See if you can anticipate and address potential counter arguments. If someone's going to come at you from another side of the issue, you think a reader might be skeptical about something that you're saying, anticipate that. Say, okay, I know they're going to challenge me on how I'm defining poverty here, because I'm defining it in terms of, socioeconomic status and opportunities. But I think that, some people here might define this in terms of race, or I think they might define this in terms of education and intellectual capacity, or not necessarily capacity, but like intellectual currency that's circulating around, professionalizing in different communities and things like that. So, just think about how could people disagree with whatever you're trying to argue in your argument. Okay. And, try to think about those misinterpretations. Are there ways that people could misinterpret what you're trying to say that could be counterproductive to your argument? And then work on that MLA formatting as well. Make sure that you've got the parentheses, you've got the citations, make sure that your works cited is on point, right? That you're including the name of the author, the title of the work, the publisher, when it was published, the page numbers that you're using. Make sure all of that's on point. Okay, so go ahead and pause if you need to, and just give me like 1 or 2 paragraphs. Just do this to your essay for maybe like 10 or 15 minutes or so. Just work on it, and then just explain a couple of changes that you made. Just say, okay, I was a little bit more clear about my solution. I did this and this, on page 3 to help clarify my solution a little bit more. or I wasn't really introducing this source well enough, so I went through and added in a couple of extra sentences explaining context, or I thought of this counter argument that I hadn't previously considered on page 5, and I decided to address it by doing this, this, and this. So just explain a couple of these changes that you made in terms of your daily writing in just a paragraph or two, and that'll be fine. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on, but make sure that you do some of that writing for your daily writing credit and for attendance. Okay, so real quickly, thinking about the strategy section. Now, this strategy section is relatively short. I think I have it clocked in at like 300 words. It'll probably be really fast to try to do it like that. So, don't be afraid to go on to, 1 or possibly even 2 pages if you want to. And that'll be fine for this. But the main goal of the strategy section is you want to analyze your rhetorical decisions by choosing your research and presenting your argument. So why did you choose certain sources? Why do you think they're going to be useful? How did that fit in with the rest of your arguments? This is very similar to what you did for your annotated and sort of explaining why you chose a source and why you think it's going to be important. Okay. So you can go through that. You could also consider why you want to omit certain possibilities. And we talked about this last time too. It's okay to omit stuff, right? So maybe you read a source and you're like, hey, man, this has a really strong counter argument to what I'm saying. I'm not going to have time to cover that. So I'm just not going to talk about it, or I'm just going to talk about it very briefly. I think the best thing to do is to, even if another source has a really good counter argument, is just to mention the source, maybe set out their counter argument a little bit there, and just say that you don't have enough time to address all of the counter arguments that they have. But if people are more interested in seeing that side of the issue, in more detail, then they could go look at this source, okay? So ideally, you try to address it, you try to offer, a really strong counter argument to it, a counter to their counter. But if it's just too hardcore, you can abridge it a little bit and just say, look, I'm not going to have time to go off down this rabbit hole from this specific aspect of the topic. But if you want to know more about it, go check this out. Just say, like, my quick answer is this, this, and this. All right? So don't do that too often. But, if there really is something that's very interesting and compelling and you want your reader to know about it and just let them know where they can find more information, then you can go ahead and mention that. Okay, but do your best if you do mention something to try to address it at least a little bit in terms of counter argument. But you get to choose, what do you want to include, what do you want to omit, and why? We mentioned this with the gun control over and over again, right? So maybe if you're focusing on the psychology of shooters and school shootings, you might say early on in your essay, hey, I don't have enough time to go into the Second Amendment, the Brady Bill, and these other sorts of legal cases about gun control. It is very important for the discussion, but this article is going to focus mostly on the psychology of this, this, and this. Okay? Or if you do want to look at sort of the legal ramifications of it, you do want to look at the legal precedent for the Second Amendment and like what's happened with gun control and some of the dangers that may be inherent with certain gun restrictions. If you want to take that side of the issue, then you might say, you could even say school shootings are very important, and it's important to understand sort of our security protocols and why there is such rampant sort of depression among teens and sort of what's inspiring people to do these shootings. But I'm not going to cover that in this essay. I'm much more focused on the legal aspect of it and sort of what these legal precedents could mean for civil liberties moving forward or something like that, right? So you can take the other side of the issue too. But just let people know where you are, what are some of the major important things that are going on in this conversation, and why you're choosing to talk about the things you're talking about, and potentially things that you're not talking about. And you can explain those decisions as well in the strategy section, why you chose to focus on certain aspects of your topic, omit other things, abridge certain things, why you chose to go in the direction you went instead of potential other directions. Okay? You can talk about your audience too and why you decided to design your argument to appeal to a specific audience. So, for example, if you're writing about genetically modified foods, the example that we used last class, and you're proposing that more companies should focus upon organic foods, then you might want to emphasize why organic food can be more profitable than genetically modified foods. Okay? So if you're focusing on kind of the CEOs and the business aspect, you might say this is why I focus on profitability. I had a little bit of a section based on health and agriculture, but I focus mostly on the business aspect and the profitability because that's my audience, because I'm talking to some of these CEOs, some of these logistics people that are making the decisions on which food shows up on the shelves. Okay, so you might explain many companies value earning large profits, so it's important to emphasize profits in this argument. So these companies might care about the potential health risk of genetically modified foods, but they might only care in respect to profits, right? So that's a little hardcore. I think that they do care about the health of people, but obviously they're running a business. You know, you might say they need some profits to keep their lights on, to keep investors happy, things like that. Okay, so for example, if you want to talk about health risks, you might suggest in your essay that GMO foods can create legal liabilities for these companies. So say this is not only a problem if people get cancer and die, but you might have legal liabilities for that. They might come at you with a bunch of lawsuits because you didn't do your due diligence about these foods and you put them on your shelves. So now you could be on the hook for millions and millions of dollars of lawsuits. So that's why, you know, this is important to pay attention to. Right? So then that way you're you're explaining why you chose to focus on the legal aspect of it there instead of focusing strictly on kind of the moral imperative or on kind of the biology of the food itself, right? Or the agriculture of the food itself. Agricultural science, okay? So that would be one way that you're adjusting your argument and not just talking about health, but also talking about legal liability in terms of money to make the argument more appealing for that specific audience. So explaining why you chose to do that could be something really interesting to talk about in your strategy section. Okay, so the main thing is you should use complete paragraphs. You don't have to have a proper introduction and conclusion because it's relatively short, but use complete paragraphs and just explain why you chose to do what you chose to do and why do you think it's going to be effective for the specific audience. So I just want you to walk me through your decisions and why you think they're going to ultimately be effective. Remember, it's not how do you feel about it. Well, I like this argument. Well, I thought this argument was interesting. It's rhetorical. Why is it going to be effective for that specific audience? Why is that one of the best choices that you could have made in comparison to other choices that you could have made in terms of how you developed your argument and how you use your sources? Okay. So yeah, you can work on the strategy section here for a little bit as well. So write some of this down in your daily writing if you want. Just give me like a paragraph or so. What are some of the key values of your reader? So what would they expect to read in an article about your topic? So we just mentioned that up above, right? So what are they going to be thinking about? Okay, this is about gun control. Okay, this is about funding for public schools. Okay, this is about teens and social media. What would they expect you to be talking about? Okay, does your argument challenge those expectations in some way? So are you making choices that are not standard or at least kind of fringe, right? Are you not talking about a popular aspect of the topic? Are you focusing on an aspect that people usually don't talk about? What are your choices there? Why do you think that's going to connect with the reader? Are there any ways that you think the reader might resist? Are there ways they might say, you know, I don't understand how she's defining this here, or I don't understand why this is important, why I should care about this, or I don't understand how this connects with other research in the field. Why is this relevant? Why should I care? That might be a really good place. And you can use stasis theory from the last unit as well. So just think about what's the moment where the reader is most likely to disagree with you, right? So what's the thing that they're going to disagree with most? The information priority, what's important to talk about, the definition of some key aspect, the ethics of the aspect, is it good, is it bad, and why, and the public policy, right? So how do we implement this? How do we get actual change to happen in some regard in respect to your topic, right? So use stasis theory to help you out if you want to think about how can someone possibly disagree with you or counter you on your argument. You know, going through those 4 steps of stasis that we learned in the last unit can be very helpful for giving you ideas for what to talk about in your strategy section. And then also think about how can you overcome this resistance, right? So what's something that you could do that would help address some of these counter arguments. So just spend about a paragraph here, once again, just talking about answering some of these questions. Another couple of things that you could talk about as well is you might think about the rhetorical tactics that you're using in your essay. So you could go back to rhetoric. So are you going to use emotion in your argument? Does it make sense, right? Are you going to be telling some of these sad stories that you found in some of your sources? You can, if it makes sense, use a personal story as well. Be very, very careful with that, though, because it needs to connect directly with the scholarship. You don't want to just say, hey, I've struggled with this issue myself, or hey, I've had a family or friend who's had to deal with this issue. You can do that, but only do it, I would say, fairly early on in the essay, just for context, just to give you some more credibility and ethos that you've also been dealing with this issue, or you have a friend or family member that's been dealing with it. And then use it to set up what your argument's going to be. So if you're talking about like the opioid crisis, for example, and you can just say, early on, I've dealt with this crisis personally. My uncle was addicted to opioids or whatever for 5 years, and some of the major problems that he had were, this, and this. These three things, the addictiveness, the relapse, the, trying to hustle money from family members, the overdose, that he had before he was revived, or whatever the case is, right? So you can use sort of a personal story to set up what are the major problems you're going to address in the essay, okay? So you can do it if it makes sense in terms of helping you establish ethos and credibility within the community, but then also setting up what your major points will be. And you'll say, thus, I want to focus on these three aspects of it because I think these are the major problems that a lot of people struggle with as addicts who are trying to, or as family members of addicts who are trying to recover. Okay? So you can use emotion in certain contexts for certain topics, but make sure that you're always asking yourself, is this going to help me appear more professional, right? Is this going to help my ethos with this topic? And for different topics, it might matter. So with something like drug addiction or something like social media usage or something like that, maybe that can help you out a little bit. But other topics out there, if you were looking at, trying to think of something like looking at some aspect of accounting or some aspect of the financial institutions, and you're just talking about, I played a mock stock market in middle school, and that got me really interested in investing, and that's why I love this topic. That's not enough, that's just kind of like a personal anecdote. It's like, okay, that's cool, but how does that fit in with the scholarly research, right? So as long as you're using a personal story to help set up the research and to establish that you're a member of that community, then that can help you out a little bit. But, use that sparingly and just think about if that kind of makes sense. Okay. Think about your logic system, right? Like we talked about earlier with logos. Are you talking about things that your audience is already going to be on board with in terms of definitions and how you're sort of piecing your argument together? Is there a way that you could explain your topic that the reader is going to be able to better connect with in terms of logos? So are you appealing to their values? Are you appealing to things they care about? So, a big part of the logos was this example that we just talked about. If you're talking to executives of a business, you might want to talk about the financial aspect of your topic because that's the logos they're going to care about most, right? They're going to be caring about the profitability of their company in some ways. So if you never mention any aspect of cost, if you never mention any of sort of these logistical aspects, if you're never mentioning things that a CEO of a company would actually care about, then it's going to be harder to get them on board with your argument. So just think about the logos aspect there. Okay. And you could also even talk about some of the limitations of your argument. Was there some research that was very difficult to come by? Did you have to make some sort of substitution where you couldn't find firsthand accounts of some aspect of your topic? So you had to, go with some of these secondary accounts, right? Maybe you were looking for something that was really historical. You're doing an older topic, something from like the 1800s, and you just couldn't find, a certain kind of source you were looking for. Maybe you're looking for a certain type of newspaper or a certain type of journal from a specific author back then, and you just couldn't find it. So just talk about, was some research really difficult to acquire? Is it particularly challenging to defend or oppose some aspects of your topic? Maybe there was something that you're like, I just can't think about this in a complex way. Right? Like this person's just evil. And I had a hard time thinking about any redeeming qualities of them or how anyone could possibly take the other side of this issue. I had a hard time thinking about counter arguments. You could explain some of that in there if you want. And then ultimately, how did you try to address this? How did you just drop it? Did you choose to omit that aspect of your topic? Did you choose to go in a different direction? How did you try to deal with that? Okay. So just give me just a paragraph or two about, any of these questions that you find most interesting or compelling regarding the strategy section. Okay. And then the final couple of things that I just wanted to mention and talk about here really quickly were just grammar related to help you out. So I'm just going to have you watch this video. Now, this was kind of split between the classes. I believe the first class we didn't get to watch the grammar video. And then the second class, we didn't get to go through the commas and passive voice. All right, so if you already watched this and you remember it from last time, definitely, fast forward or skip to the next part, whichever part's relevant. But I'm just going to go through both of these, and I'm going to ask you just to write one final few sentences or paragraph about grammar just to help you professionalize a little bit more. So we're just going to start off watching this video here really quickly. Once again, if you were part of the second class, you can skip down to the section about commas here in about 10 minutes or so and answer those questions instead if you want. Okay, but we're going to watch this video again, and I just want you to just jot down in your daily writing just a couple of notes. Which grammar mistakes confuse you the most? So after watching this video, was there something that you learned? You're like, oh my gosh, I do that all the time. I didn't realize that was a mistake. Or I know that I do that and it's a real problem and I've got to figure out a way to try to fix it. And then what's your advice? I guess maybe not to for others because we're not going to be able to do any group work with this. But just think about how can you try to fix this? What are some things you can do to try to work on this? So don't look at everything. I think he offers like 38 common mistakes. Just see if you can pick one or two of them and just write down, does that apply to you? Is this a big mistake that you make? And just, is there some way that you could try to not make this mistake as much that they mentioned? Did some of their solutions help you out? Okay, so let's just watch this really quickly. Then I'll let you answer those questions, and then we'll talk about commas and some of that other punctuation here real quick. Okay. So let's just watch this for a little bit.
John Green, welcome to my salon. This is menopause, is what many of you think I'm saying when I say this is mental floss. That's just one of many questions of grammar, spelling, and usage that we will be exploring and correcting today.
Sorry if that's a little bit louder. I'm trying to get it.
Let's just start out with one that no matter how many times I hear it, I always struggle with, even though I know I'm a novelist. Lay versus lie. Lay is transitive. It needs a direct subject and one or more objects. And the past tense of lay is laid, which slang makes confusing because it is also something that you can get. So you lay down your copy of the brilliant and heartwarming novel The Fault in Our Stars. If it happened in the past, you laid down your copy of The Fault in Our Stars. Lie does not require an object, and the past tense of lie is, of course, lay. So if you need to get out of gym class, and if you're like me, you do, then you need to go to the nurse's office and lie down. Whereas Clark Kent lay down when he found that he could not save Toad from the gigantic bear. Skeleton. Literally means something that 100% for sure, no doubt, is true. For example, you did not literally die when you fell down the stairs because you are telling me the story of your literal dying. This is a bad sentence. I wish One Direction would come to Indianapolis. I think Niall Horan would like it here. If your sentence contains two independent thoughts, you have a run-on sentence. If you put a comma in the middle, that just gives you a comma splice. Try using a semicolon, or even better, a period. There's this band I like called the Avett Brothers, possibly the Avett Brothers, and they have this song I like in which they sing, I want to have friends that I can trust who love me for the man I've become, not the man that I was. But it should be who? It should be three who's. I want to have friends who I can trust, who love me for the man who I've become. That is for non-people. Who is for people. And when you call a who a that, you are dehumanizing the who. And don't dehumanize the who. They already have enough problems just with old age. Your delicious new chili red Mini Cooper is not for sale. It is for sale. Okay, who and whom. Who and whom are both pronouns. Who is a subject, whom is an object. So who is your favorite Spice Girl, but whom do you like among the Spice Girls? Easy trick, if your answer would contain a he or a she, use who. If your answer would contain a him or a her, use whom. If you're using a singular noun, use a singular pronoun. And if you're using a plural noun, use a plural pronoun. For example, everyone in our office has their friends, but everyone in our office has his or her favorite episode of Duck Dynasty. It's Catcher in the Rye, but Sex and the City. You nip it in the bud. Never nip anything in the butt. You couldn't care less. Saying you could care less implies that you care at least somewhat because you could reduce your level of caring. A lot is 2 words, as in I have a space lot of unwatched episodes of The Vampire Diaries on my DVR. Lose, as in lose the game, has 1 O. Loose, as in hey Justin Bieber, I haven't seen pants that loose since MC Hammer, has 2 O's. If you're referring to something you can count, use fewer. If it's an uncountable quality, like love, use less.
Actually,
for instance, there is now 1 fewer Matryoshka doll on the wall of magic, and it is a little bit less magical. Could of is not a thing. Neither is should of, neither is would of. You get the picture. Could've is a contraction of could have. Should've is a contraction of should have. I'll leave it to you to figure out what would've means. Speaking of commonly said things that are not in fact things, for all intensive purposes is wrong. It's for all intents and purposes. Subjects, I, you, he, she, it, we, they. Objects, me, you, him, her, it, us, them. So, I, you, he, she, it, we, they ate ice cream. But Henry VIII married and then decapitated me, you, him, her, it, us, them. Here's a quick tip for figuring out whether to use me or I. Take away the other noun in the sentence. For example, Mark and me went to Starbucks or Mark and I went to Starbucks. First, you have to remove Mark. I am sorry, Mark. I went to Starbucks makes sense, but me went to Starbucks sounds like Captain Caveman, so you use I. Anxious means you are nervous. It comes from anxiety. If you're excited for something, you're eager, not anxious. Good is an adjective or a noun. Well is always an adverb, so you're not doing good because you're describing how you're doing. You're doing well, which is good. If implies a condition. Whether implies there are 2 options, so we don't know whether to watch Full House or Sabrina the Teenage Witch, but watch Full House if it's the episode about Michelle getting amnesia. If it's coming toward the speaker, use bring. If it's going away from the speaker, use take. So Mark is bringing me the laser cat. Thank you, Mark. This is so awesome. I am so, yes, do it. Why did you take it away? Historic is something significant that happened in history, but historical is just anything that happened in the past. Of course, deciding what's significant is subjective. That's why we have Crash Course History. All right, let's quickly go through some words that sound the same. Your means you are. Your is something you possess. It means it is or it has. Its is something that it possesses. This is its eye. It's named Cellophane, by the way. We can't tell you the story. It's too cute. You're going there. Something they own is theirs, and they're weird. If you're trying to say who is, contract to whose. Whose indicates ownership or of whom or which. Mistakes. Emigrate with an E if you're moving away from your home country. Immigrate with an I if you're moving to a new country. I mean, usually you're doing both at the same time. It's really a matter of which country's paperwork you're filling out. Pro tip, keep all passports. 2 is the number that comes after 1. 2 is also, and 2 is the only one you can use as an infinitive or as a preposition, as in I want to go to Disney World. Allusion is the noun form of the verb to allude. Illusion is what Job does on Arrested Development. A bear is what you don't want to encounter on your camping trip. It's also to carry or to tolerate, as in bear with me, or to stay in one direction, bear right. Bare means exposed or naked, as in how I feel when singing karaoke. Illicit is a verb. Illicit is an adjective. You can think of it this way. Illicit drugs will make you ill. Lead is the past tense of lead. Lead is the kind of paint you shouldn't eat. You write notes on stationery. Think E for envelope. And you remain stationary. The weather channel is completely unnecessary because Siri, whereas weather I already explained. Affect is a verb implying change. Effect is a noun meaning the result. Some people think that you can use effect as a verb as well, but those people are wrong. Use Dan for for comparisons, otherwise use then to mean next or later. Like One Tree Hill is better than the OC. Well, we can watch One Tree Hill then instead of the OC. Speaking of my love for early 2000s TV, Mr. Feeney was Corey Matthews' principal. Principal with an A can also mean the highest in importance. The principal problem in this office, for instance, is that no one appreciates a good Boy Meets World reference. A principle is only a noun, meaning a law or a rule. Accept is a verb, as in you have to accept that we are back at the salon and therefore this video is almost over. Except is a preposition or conjunction, like this video is over, except for the credits. Thanks for watching Mental Floss, which is brought to you with the help of these.
Okay. So hopefully that gave you some ideas. If you need to go back and watch part of that, you can. But just point out, just tell me just like a couple of things that you often struggle with as a writer. Like I said, there are several of those that I make mistakes with my writing from time to time. We all do. That's why it's just important to think carefully about, okay, I'm going to make sure I get the correct usage of there. Or, okay, I'm going to make sure I get the correct usage of, less, right? Like I mentioned earlier, fewer or less, which is, that's something that I mess up all the time. My wife's got it down, but I end up messing that up a lot. But yeah, so just see if you can point out just a couple of those things. It really does help you professionalize. And on that note, I talked about this in both classes, I believe, but the grammar is really important because of the professional aspect of it, all right? Now, does grammar matter really that much when you're just talking with your friends or you're tweeting or you're just writing something online? Does it matter that much? Probably not. A lot of people aren't even going to know about a lot of those mistakes, but the thing is, when it does matter, it can matter a lot. So when you're writing something, trying to get into grad school, or you're trying to write a professional publication, or you're trying to write a professional email to someone, or you're applying for a professional job, those people, a lot of them are going to notice many of those grammar mistakes. And especially if you're making like very popular, obvious ones, like not using the correct form of there, or using like loose instead of lose, like I mentioned there, that really hurts your ethos, because it can if you do that a lot, it can reveal like one or two things to the potential person who's reading that, right? It could say either that you don't use spell check, that you're lazy, that you just don't care about this job or this position, or it could be that you're ignorant, that you don't know how to use proper grammar, and therefore you're not going to be a really effective communicator, right? It's going to make their brand look ignorant, right? If they hire you and you're sending out all these emails with crazy, grammatical errors and things all the time, it might make their brand, their company, look bad in front of clients, right? And so it has this trickle-down effect where they don't want to hire somebody that either looks ignorant or lazy, because those aren't good qualities, right, for an employee. So it's not that they can't figure out what you mean when you use the incorrect version of there, or when you use the incorrect version of, to, or whatever, but it's just that it can hurt the brand, it can hurt the company, right, by bringing you in there. So that's why it matters. So like 99% of the time in your life, is it going to matter if you have, a couple of grammatical errors? No, it's not. But that 1% when it does matter is a very, very important 1%. That could be you get the job or you don't get the job, okay? So it's super competitive out there. There are hundreds and hundreds of applicants that apply for anything. And a lot of, hiring managers are just looking for any reason to narrow the field. And if your communication is just littered with mistakes like that, that's a really simple way they can just weed you out and move on to the next person. Okay, so that's why. I think it's so confusing to people, because they'll think, who cares about, grammar? I tweet all the time. My friends understand me. Like, people know what I mean. Who cares if I make this mistake or that mistake? It's like, well, your friends don't care. Your future boss might care. Okay, so that's why it matters. All right. And the last couple of things I want to talk about this video, and then we'll just go ahead and move on. So once again, we did that video with the second class. We didn't do it with the first class, and then we talked about the commas in the first class, but we didn't do that in the second class. We ended up getting those switched up a little bit. But the commas, really quickly, just remember that the purpose of a comma is to create a pause. So whenever you read something, it should naturally feel in your speech like there's a comma there most of the time where commas show up. Okay, so a good way to help you out with commas is just look for these problematic words that have different comma usages around them very often. So and, but, and or, these conjunction words. Okay? And commas can completely change the meaning of certain things too. So I have a BuzzFeed article here. It's a little older. There's a little bit of some kind of mature language in there, so check that out. But it can show you in some funny ways via like social media how some of these mistakes can make you look a little silly in certain situations, okay? But here's a really good, simple way to figure out if you need a comma around those words. If both sides of the word are a complete thought, then you need a comma there. If they are not a complete thought on both sides of the comma, or on both sides of that word, then you don't need a comma. So for example, I went to the grocery store, but I forgot to buy milk, okay? Each side is a complete sentence, therefore you should use a comma, okay? Because I went to the grocery store, full sentence. I forgot to buy milk, full sentence, therefore there's a comma. Okay? If you say, I want pizza or spaghetti tonight for dinner, I want pizza, that's a full sentence. Spaghetti tonight for dinner is not a full sentence. Okay? So there's no verb on the spaghetti half, so that's not a sentence, no comma. Okay? Now, when it starts to get a little more complicated, you got to look a little more carefully at it, but it's the same principles apply, right? Mike and Will went to the park to play baseball and basketball, but Will forgot his glove. Okay? So let's look at the first one, and. Mike and Will went to the park to play baseball. Okay? Mike, not a complete sentence, right? So don't need a comma there. Now let's look at the next part. Mike and Will went to the park to play basketball. Okay, so basketball, not a complete sentence, right? On its own. So no comma there. Now let's look at the next one. But Mike and Will went to the park to play baseball and basketball. Will forgot his glove. Okay, both of those are complete sentences, so we do need a comma there. So we put a comma before but. Okay, so just slow down and look at that. Every time you encounter one of those words, just think, in that sentence, on both sides, is it a complete thought? If it is a complete thought, you put a comma there. If it's not a complete thought, do not put a comma there. That's the easiest way to do it. Okay, that way you don't have to know subordinate clauses, conjunctions, all of these different like fancy grammar words. You can just do that system. It'll work for you the vast majority of the time. Okay. Another way that you could look at this is, and this is very common with run-ons, if you have 3 complete thoughts, you cannot use a comma, okay, on the second one. So look at this. We have James and Fred went bowling. James saw his ex at the bowling alley with Charles. Okay, those are 2 complete thoughts, so you need a comma there. And James decided to take a few shots in the car before facing the awkward situation. Okay, so this is also a complete thought. So we have 3 complete thoughts. James and Fred went bowling. James saw his ex at the bowling alley, and James decided to have a few drinks in his car. Okay, so you can't have that. So a good way to fix that is you can either put a comma here, or not a comma. You can either put a period here and just say James decided to take a few shots, or you can put a semicolon there, and just, the semicolon's the easiest thing. Just put semicolon in replace of a comma, boom, it works. And James decided to take a few shots afterwards. So that's a really easy fix there. And then finally, passive voice is one of the last ones that I'll mention here, because I know we're pretty much over time. But you want to be as clear and direct as possible in your writing. So, I know as a culture, a lot of times we think of great writing as being this, very verbose and poetic stuff. But you really want your writing to be direct and understandable and easily skimmable as much as possible. So, for example, if you look at this, while walking to class, a cautious or a curious thing has been known to happen to Samantha, and this knowledge belies the loquacious nature of campus. She gets hollered at, often several times, by frat guys for wearing a SpongeBob scarf in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees. Okay, so very verbose. You get what they mean, but it kind of jumps around and uses some confusing punctuation at times. A good way to rewrite this would be, frat guys often yell at Samantha for wearing a SpongeBob scarf in hot weather, and this behavior reflects the boisterous nature of many campus students. Much easier to read. Pretty much says the same thing, but it just flows much better. It's just straight like noun to noun, verb, right? Or subject, verb, subject, verb. So passive voice can make things difficult to read, can obscure the doer of the action, right? So it can obscure the subject. So if you say, it is known that Samantha wears scarves, the problem with this is who knows that, right? It obscures the knower. So does the government know that? Does Bob know that? Does her teacher know that? Who knows this? Okay? And here's a Wikipedia link if you want to know more about that particular grammatical structure. But you can turn this into active voice, and this makes it a lot more clear. So you can say, Tom knows that Samantha wears scarves. Okay? Very simple fix, but you're making it clear who's doing the knowing, right? So Tom knows that Samantha wears scarves is much more clear. Right? Because this seems like this is not a big deal, but if you have an entire paper that's like this, it's just constantly bouncing around in passive voice, and you're talking about multiple different sources, and you're making complex arguments, it can get very confusing. Who's doing the knowing? Who's doing the action? Who's accountable for those actions? Okay? So there are some types of writing that end up using passive voice, and this is often if you have a collective, like a scientific team, sometimes people use passive voice. I would still say in a lot of scientific writing, people would prefer active voice, but that's where you see it the most often. But I would still try to activate as many voices as you can. Or activate the voice in as many sentences as you can, I should say. So here's another example of passive voice. It has been argued that aliens will attack Earth within 5 years. Okay, who argued this? Is it the Pentagon? Is it Jimbo's blog? Who's saying this? Because this could be very, very important, right? What's the ethos of this situation? Should I actually be worried about this? Or is this just another conspiracy theory? Okay. Another thing that you'll probably encounter at some point in your life is the runaround, right? The bureaucratic runaround. Your request has been rejected. Okay. It's like, oh, well, who rejected that, right? Was it your boss? Was it your boss's boss? Was it someone from a different department? Like, who do I need to talk to try to appeal this? So, this can be very frustrating as well when you're given the bureaucratic runaround to readers or potentially your clients in the future. So you always want to try to be direct just so people know who's making the decisions, who should get credit for the actions. Okay? So passive voice often encourages evasive language, and you should try to avoid evasive language as much as possible. Okay, so there are ways to still be evasive using active voice. You could say our company rejects your request, and that still shrouds who's making the decision. But active voice is at least going to make it easier to identify the subjects. Okay. All right, and we'll just skip this because we're already kind of late there. But you can kind of read that over if you want to see some advanced types of punctuation, how to use it: semicolon, colon, and dash. Okay. And I think we'll maybe talk about the audience, and then we'll transition to the next point next class. But I know we're over time, so we'll go ahead and move on here. But anyways, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions about this, just email me, jmotes. You guys know the email address. I'm going to be emailing you this, but jmotes@vols.utk.edu. Next class, we should have the live stream ready, up and going at noon, and then I will have the Discord ready as well if you want to hang out after class and talk in there if you have any questions. I'll be in there for about an hour, just chilling after class to field any questions that you may have. But anyways, that's going to be it. Be sure to do the daily writing, write down some answers to this. Make sure you post that in your daily writing folder. Remember that the final draft for Project 4 is now due next week, next Thursday, so you have 9 additional days to work on that. Hopefully that helps you out. Be sure to check out the past video that I just posted up yesterday. I'll have it linked at the top of the notes to this video as well. And that'll tell you everything that's changing in the class. I hit the highlights at the start of this video, but that goes more in depth about it. But anyways, that's going to be it. Have a great day. Thanks, y'all, for coming out, and we'll see you next time.